he started as an apprentice at a contractor in Holland, and he worked there for, I guess, a couple of years, did you?
No, a little over a year.
Little over a year. He learned about, he was an errand boy, so he learned about bookkeeping and
I had to do the wage administration and all that sort of stuff.
right, so you learned about that kind of stuff, and then you got a notice from
I learned to type.
You learned to type there
Yeah.
too. Oh, good.
Geez, one finger each hand, that's good.
Well, at least you learned something. So then
This
you
was
got a,
before the electric typewriters.
right, so then there was a German
Tom,
notification
do you
to
want
your
coffee?
boss,
I'm gonna take a shower.
who was,
so let-
your
let-
boss was doing contract work for the Germans, building cement.
50% of his work was defensive stuff.
Defensive stuff, so he was doing concrete stuff in the dunes to prevent invasion and,
Oh yeah, they were the gun emplacements. The funny part of it was that they had, and the people in the office knew, I didn't tell you that, but they made a big platform, concrete platform. They didn't realize that the dunes were moving, you know, the loose sand would blast. That there were plants on it, but the plant was like a mat. The mat followed a new contour every time. It was a slow process, you know, so that the stupid person wouldn't even notice there were changes. But what happened was that you made a gun emplacement, and it was very important for the Germans to have it perfectly level. And then, of course, a couple of months later, it wasn't perfectly level anymore. So there was totally useless defense equipment.
yeah.
The only thing that they really wanted to prevent is the flooding of the country, you know, because they had, even though they have dunes themselves, the Germans, they had no experience in trying to survive when you're below sea level.
So were these concrete things for prevention of flooding then? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, they were platforms for guns, gun emplacements.
Okay, that's what I thought. So, okay, so then after that, your boss got a notice from the Germans that
20%.
20% layoffs had to be done, and this was
Yeah.
sent to every establishment in the country, right?
Well, I don't
Pretty
know,
well,
but I
but-
mean, he got it, and a lot of people did get it, you know.
Okay.
I didn't check out.
So then you and another guy were laid off, you because you were single and therefore didn't have any dependents.
Well,
and the
yeah,
youngest
I would
guy
have
in the factory.
volunteered even, because the medic people had the prior right on staying home.
Right,
I mean, nobody wanted to go to Germany. There were opportunities, like a friend of mine volunteered to go to Germany and went to Bremen for a year, you know, the year's contract. But then by that time, the war had progressed, and he went home, but some other people, they couldn't go home anymore. They told them to stay.
yeah. So then the personnel office, which was run by Germans or Nazis,
No, that was the employment.
oh, the employment office, they got a list of everybody that got laid off.
Yeah.
And then from that list, they sent everybody a letter saying you have to report to, in your case, to such and such a
To be
train.
tested, you know.
Well, you had to be,
tested.
report to be tested. So then you went for testing, and what happened?
Well, the lady said, drop your pants and all that sort of stuff.
Right, and then you said, well, why the heck should I? And she says, well, I need to see if you're fit for employment, so,
No, for heavy work.
Oh, for
Because-
heavy work.
Yeah, so then I got a piece of paper that said that I was fit, suitable for every type of work.
right, and what she
No.
wanted to see was whether you had a rupture, which I assume means like a hernia.
A hernia.
Right, so drop your pants, blow onto your wrist, no rupture, you're fit for heavy work.
Yeah.
Okay, so then after that, you got a letter saying you had to report to someplace.
So then the next thing I did, and I didn't mention it, are you recording now?
I think Tom is recording, yeah.
Okay, but then the next thing that happened is that I wasn't going to go to Germany in the first place, you know, in my mind. So I went to the Haarlemmermeer polder, you know, the polder that used to be a lake between Haarlem and
Okay.
Amsterdam, where there were big farmers, you know, and
Yeah.
I said, can I have a job? And there was one farmer and he had about 4 Jews already there, plus a bunch of Dutch guys. And he said, yes, you can work here, but you have to pay me 30 guilders a week, which was double the amount of money I was making at the time at the job, you know. So I had to pay him. And I mean, it was obvious that I couldn't afford it, and my parents couldn't afford it. So then, and I wasn't going to live underneath the floor, because we are on sandy land, but, I mean, my brother has done that, you know, and it did affect him, Theo. So then, in the meantime, the paperwork kept on coming, so the paperwork said I had a reservation on a D train, you know, which is an international train. So anyway, to Berlin.
So let me just go back to living under the floor. That was because the farmer had to hide you?
No. Theo lived under the floor
At home.
at home. Yeah.
Okay, so living under the floor meant,
You had no rations.
okay,
You had to be fed from the rations that the other people had. And you had to try to, they built a little dike underneath the floor because
Yeah.
the Germans would know about it, and they would use a small machine gun to trrrt, just in case somebody was stupid enough to stick his head up. You know, and they would just make sure that there was nobody there.
yeah.
Anyway, that's a different story now.
Yeah.
And, so I ended up going with the train. The amazing thing was that it wasn't people that were in bonds or in chains or anything, arrested. You got a piece of paper and that's all you needed. The piece of paper would tell the officials that would stop you in the street or whatever, where you're going, what are you going to do, what's your name, what's your age, are we looking for you, and so they were looking for everybody. So anyway, we got off the train in Magdeburg, which is halfway between the border and
Berlin.
Ended up in Dessau.
Which is not the train you were supposed to be on.
No,
You were supposed to
no.
go to Berlin, but you
Yeah,
didn't want to go to
and-
Berlin.
And every car, railroad car, was inspected by the Gestapo as it was traveling. But in our particular case, for some strange reason, the Gestapo guy never got to us, or we never saw him. It was too short a distance, maybe. But anyway, we got off the train in Dessau, and in Dessau, of course, they the first thing they wanted to know. First we had we got off the train, and there was only one man. He was a sort of a street sweep, and we asked him where the Yonkers plant was, and he told us to go by the sound that we heard outdoors, which later on turned out to be 96 airplane engines all running at full blast for testing purposes. You know?
Right, and you had said you couldn't hear it from inside the building, but
No.
standing outside the building, you could hear the low hum.
Yeah.
And then you ended up walking with your heavy suitcases to
Yeah.
the plant, which was about 3 kilometers.
Yeah.
And then you came up to the guard and wanted to be let in.
Yeah, and then we found out that we couldn't get in, and the personnel office wasn't in the plant in any case, and then we found out that it was right next to the railway station, which is where we came from. So then we got there, and the first thing, there was a very friendly Bavarian type. Many people had Nazi badges, but
Yeah.
they really weren't Nazis at all.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing you learn in Germany, you know, that not everybody was a Nazi. So this guy was very friendly, and he said, where's your papers? And we said we had lost them. We
Yeah.
don't have them. Oh, goody, he said, which was another thing that was funny. You know, but now he had freedom to do what he wanted. So he said, he asked the other guy, he said, what are your qualifications? Well, he said, I'm an aeronautical engineer. he wasn't finished studying.
Yeah.
He said, oh, good. And he said, what are you mainly interested in? He said, airframe. Oh, he said, we have a plant. He said, you have a choice of 10 plants, you know. And he said, we have a plant in Keuzen, you know, in not too far from Leipzig. And they do airframes, you know, so if you want to do airframes, we can send you to Keuzen. Oh, the guy said, good, you know, because he wanted to learn. And he said, and how about you? And I said, well, I said, I'm an airplane designer and so on, but I like engines, you know. Oh, he said, well, he said, then, no, and the other thing I liked, I said, I want to be as far east as possible. And he said, why? I said, I hate bombers. And they couldn't reach Leipzig already, you know, but there was no doubt that in the future they might be able to reach it. So I said, I want to go further east, as far east as possible. Well, Leipzig was the easternmost plant of the 10 that they had, so I ended up in an engine repair plant because they had engines from planes that had been shot down that they were refurbishing and everything else. Anyway, that was a whole story in itself. And so I ended up in Leipzig. He gave me a ticket for Leipzig. Plus, he gave me a big brown envelope. He said, would you give that to Mr. So-and-so over there? And I couldn't believe the trust. I mean, here I was a goddamn foreigner. And I was given this big envelope, even though it wasn't confidential information. He trusted me to hand it over to the personnel department there. So the first week, I had, my accommodation was the third bunk on a whole big room full with 3-tier bunks. And there was all kinds, especially Dutchmen, but there was all kinds of foreigners there, all guys, you know. And at night, it was a busy place, you know, because they make a lot of noise and most of them couldn't sleep. And so on, they were just telling stories and everything else. And in the meantime, every once in a while, somebody would light a match. And then the light would disappear. And we wondered what the hell was going on. Now, this building was a former Masonic lodge in the middle of town. And it was right in the red light district as well. So right across from us was one of the best whorehouses in Leipzig. And on Saturdays there was like an open market, you know, to where people traded butter for something else. They all had rations, but there were certain foods they didn't want and certain foods they did want and what have you. But in the meantime, while I was there, they were playing with these matches while they were talking. And I wanted to sleep, but I couldn't. And I said, what are you fellas doing? They said, we're killing the bed bugs. Because the place was totally infested with bed bugs. And they were all in these wooden 3-tier cots.
Yeah.
And so on. Everything was made from paper. The mattress was made from paper. The fill of the mattress was made from strips of paper, you know, old newspapers and so on. It was very hard stuff to sleep on, but if you were sleepy enough, you know, you could have a good rest.
Yeah.
So anyway, a week later, I was assigned a boarding house. Why? Because I discovered that they put me in the engineering department, the design department, you know, and I was going to be a draftsman. Because when I told the guy I was an engineer, he said, oh, you're a draftsman in Dessau. So anyway, then I started living with an old couple, a real old couple. They came from the country and they lived in this apartment in town. And they were the nicest people you could meet. I forgot their name, but I have it written down in my diary. And you know, I carried stuff for the old lady. We were on the second floor of a five-story building.
Yeah.
And I walked to the plant. And the plant, by the way, that was the funniest part. Leipzig was world famous for the Leipziger Messe. The Leipziger Messe was an exhibit of industrial products made in Germany, you know, once a year they had an exhibit that showed all the latest machinery of all kinds
Yeah.
made in the whole of Germany.
Yeah.
And it was world famous because Leipzig was then just totally full of people. There was no room. You couldn't find a hotel room or nothing. It was that famous. But during the war, of course, they didn't. And the other half a year, they would have consumer products and foods, you know, as the Leipziger Messe. So Leipzig was world famous, internationally famous trading
Yeah.
city. And has always been that way in the past, and also now in the future, they have become famous again. So it was bigger than the Toronto
Yeah.
big show, which I didn't know anything about. But anyway, the plant was in all these buildings. So there was building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, building 9.
Yeah.
I was located in building 9, you know, and architecturally some of them were very, very nice, but they had one whole building to just take airplane engines apart, you know, and there was a whole bunch of old Germans working there. Now, inside the plant, I got to know a lot of people because being a draftsman, I was one of the few people that was allowed to go everywhere. And that has been the same at Philips later on. And that's what I wanted, because I wanted to learn what was going on. So one of the places I went was building number 7, you know, where they tore the engines apart. But there were other buildings where they did other things and so on. And there was a whole machine shop and so on. But in peacetime, it had been the main building for the exhibit. You know, this is where all the expensive executives met, and they had a swimming pool right alongside, which was still there, but the building that belonged to the swimming pool already had been bombed out, you know. And there were interesting people working there. You know, we were on the 2nd floor.
Yeah.
And downstairs they had quite a few German women also working in that place. That's where they were assembling engines, you know, like new. But anyway, we got fed in the plant, so there was a canteen, and once a day, you know, around 12 o'clock, we got our full meal. And then we got enough, like 5 slices of bread to last us for the rest of the evening and the next morning for breakfast. And once a month maybe we would get some butter. You know, we got stuff so that we could feed ourselves. There was no way you could feed yourself in town because you needed a ration ticket, which we didn't have, except all restaurants were obliged to make a certain percentage of their food production available to anybody who came. The problem is that the restaurants opened up at 5 o'clock. The plant let us go at 7 o'clock. They had 12-hour shifts. You started at 7 in the morning, you ate at 12 o'clock in the canteen, and at 7 o'clock in the evening, you raced out of the gate, and we were walking, or took the streetcar. The streetcars there were faster than any streetcars I've seen anywhere. You jumped the streetcar to go downtown and went into a restaurant, and you ordered the meal that was where you didn't need a ticket, you know. And the guy would have no time for you. He had arms full of beer, and he would just plunk a big beer down in front of you. Everybody got beer, because if you didn't take beer, he wouldn't even look at you. So we had to have beer. So we drank the beer, we ate the food, got the hell out of there, went to the next restaurant, and the same thing 3 times, and that was just about enough to feed us. By then, we were feeling pretty good, you know, and it was going to be like 10 o'clock or 10:30.
Yeah.
So you spent the whole evening finding food downtown. And Leipzig was geared to that. And there was funny things. Now, the nicest people that you could meet were the male servants, because quite likely they were anti-Nazi. In Leipzig was one of the red cities in Germany. They had very few Nazis, you know. They were international city. And what was the other thing? Oh yeah, the other reliable people were the barbers. Now, I never got my hair cut more than once a month, normally in Holland. In Leipzig, I got my hair cut at least every week. On Saturday, we had Saturday morning off, and they did a nice job. And all these guys were anti-Nazi, so they were whispering things in our ears, and we heard this. They talked softly enough so that a potential Nazi, if it happened to be there, wouldn't hear what you said. So those are the things I learned pretty fast. And in the meantime, on Saturdays, we also went to the market. It's like the farmer's market today, except there were no farmers, but there was all these foreigners. And they were trading food and trading cigarettes, and so that was the main purpose. So I told you it was the red light district, so all these women, they were hanging out of the windows, especially in the summertime, and hollering at the guys, and why don't you come upstairs, and it's a very, and they sort of advertise themselves verbally, and so on. And the way these buildings were built, because I'd never seen a whorehouse before in my life, you go inside, and you can get beer, you know, if you wanted to, but basically there was a lot of trading went on, especially if it was raining, you know. And eventually the complaint went from the madam and so on that were running these facilities that they didn't get any customers because the foreigners were only interested in trading, you know. So then the police came in full uniform, and they told the guys, you're not allowed to be trading inside the building unless you have visited upstairs first. So the market probably left and went for another neighborhood where there was no red light district. So this was the funny part. And but eventually Leipzig got bombed. And then all the foreigners had to leave their boarding houses, whatever they were boarding.
So your house was neat.
And
But you were there when it was bombed, right?
well, I didn't expect it to be bombed right away, you see, because I arrived the end of July, 1st of August, 43.
Yeah.
And my birthday, the 21st birthday, was the 2nd of December. On the 4th of December, the feast of St. Barbara, we got bombed the hell out, you know, and personally I had no bombs on the house that I was in.
Yeah.
But the old people were told to leave town, you know,
Yeah.
go back to your old village and so on.
But I
So
remember.
that the people that would be, had lost their place could move in.
And I remembered you told me that you were counting the sticks of bombs because they came down 4 at a time, like 4 in a row. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4.
No, that's
And-
regular explosives.
And you knew.
They would drop 4 bombs. Each
Yeah.
Lancaster would drop 4 bombs.
Yeah.
So you just 4 in a row, but you didn't know if it was approaching you or going away. So you heard bang, and if you heard a softer bang and a softer one, you ignored counting. But if it got louder, then if you could still hear number 4, you knew you weren't hit.
But you said you broke a couple of teeth when you were in the basement of your place.
And I
When
don't
you're-
remember anymore.
You told me that you broke a couple of teeth because you were clenching your teeth so hard, and that when you got out of the building in the morning, that none of the rest of the houses on your block were left standing. It was only your house that was left standing. That's what I recall hearing.
No, it was entirely
Yeah.
entirely true. Though the neighborhood received some bombs, but
Yeah.
nothing like some other neighborhood.
Yeah.
The best figure is the one of 3,600, because a week and a half or 2 weeks after the raid, I went to the general burial general cemetery
Yeah.
of the town and counted the new graves, 3,600.
3,600 graves.
The green beans.
And I had to take a picture, which I still
The
have,
first day, they look
of
okay.
one of the guys
The
that
next
I
day,
knew,
you know what?
and always,
Then I
we
buy
went to that
frozen.
neighborhood because they bombed the hell out of it. And we couldn't find him, we couldn't find the house he lived in, it was all flattened out, and the only thing I found was a shoe, which I recognized as his.
Yeah.
That's all there was. And then later on, that's why I went to the graveyard, to take a picture of the grave.
Yeah.
But the grave had a wooden cross, but there was a Nazi symbol on it,
That's still quite
which is
expensive because of 99
totally
cents.
inappropriate,
And
but
then,
I had to do
you know, buy
something.
one.
So I took a picture and sent it to his mother.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, like, sometimes, like, when I drove Jocelyn to Wild.
So then later on, I was boarding with new people. There were two women
Yeah.
and a son. The son was 14 or something. You know. I wasn't in the military yet.
But
And,
here they were still for.
But eventually,
But they were always $6.99.
all the foreigners had
And
to
then
get
all of
the
a
hell
sudden,
out.
2 for $4.
And then we went, I went to the southern part of the city, and there was a pub, and the pub had a dance hall.
And the guys at the vegetable
So
gardens,
they had the 3-tier bit in the dance hall.
Yeah.
And it was mainly older Germans that had experienced the First World War and that were displaced. Many of them from Hamburg and so on,
Yeah.
you know, they just had no place to live. And they were put to work in other parts of Germany. So I was one of the younger ones, and there wasn't one that was a Nazi. I think the Nazis got privileged treatment everywhere. So and we never, that place never got bombed, you know, but there was still quite a hike
Yeah.
to go to the plant, because we had to take the streetcar, and then we had to walk some way to get into the plant.
Yeah.
But the plant had another funny feature. There was a big alleyway right in the middle, you know. Germans like parades and so on, so it was ideal for that. And beyond that, beyond the property, there was a humongous park. And in the middle of the humongous park was what they call the Völkerschlachtdenkmal, which is the commemoration of the Battle of the Nations against Napoleon. And they built the largest monument at the time, the largest monument in Europe, that was all made and financed by penny contributions of children. And it's enormous. I mean, the base of it was solid rock, was larger than the base of this house. And I don't know how many stories high it was, but it was the best place to hide because they could drop a nuclear bomb on the damn thing, they wouldn't budge. You know, but it was interesting because we would, if it was an alarm and we had to leave the plant, as soon as there was an air warning, we had to leave the plant. And we all had designated areas, and we went to this particular commemorative building. And we went inside sometimes and go upstairs, which you're not allowed, and see the bombers
Yeah.
flying. I mean, but we felt safe because, you know, but there were bombs dropped on the damn thing. And then they had, there was a pool, but there was no water in it. And on each side there were the columns, and then you could still walk behind the columns. So what we used to do, we used to hide behind the columns when they were dropping bombs. So you would see, those were the days towards the end of the war in February, when the Americans stopped painting their planes. They were just as shiny
I just wanted to phone you
anything.
like in the evening, so you know.
Glittering in the sunshine. I mean, and there were German women, they were hollering, they said, "Now we have lost the war." And I said, "How so?" She said, they don't paint them anymore. You know, and I think I heard later that it saved something like 30 kilograms of paint.
You can't do any.
And also that they could go and fly just a little bit further because of the lack of painting.
So I try to limit it.
But I remember this one guy, and he followed me like a dog later on. He wasn't quite there, you know, he was retired. Petrus was his name, the Germans call him Petrus, Peter. He came from The Hague, you know, but he was also one of the slave laborers. When the bombs started dropping, which we could see, we would lie down behind the column on the ground, but here was Petrus walking around, you know. Everybody was hiding behind these columns, you know. And I said, Petrus! I said, and I did this, and he jumped right on top of me, laid on top of me. And no sooner had he done that, a big bomb exploded not too far.
Oh, I remember hearing that or reading that in your diary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So the guy that told you.
so Petrus felt I had saved his life.
No, these guys are trading
Because where he stood, there was a shell, piece of the housing of the bomb that had flown right across and gone right into a stone wall. So he knew.
They sometimes bully each other, but like if you read 10 opinions, you get say, what do they think?
It was sort of interesting.
It's
And the same though in that park between the monument and the plant,
back into the 2000s.
there was this
So
park and grassy fields and so on.
the market,
Yeah.
like
And so there was about a kilometer between the plant and the park.
the last month, you know, so it's just not here.
And they had dropped loads of bombs. They dropped them all at the same time. The Americans didn't have individual bomb aimers for each plane.
Which market is this?
They had flocks of 18 planes, 2 of which were equipped with bomb aiming equipment.
Stock exchange?
So the commander was in one of them, and they would holler on the radio when to drop the bomb. So they dropped them all at the same time. So
There's a
the shaking and so on and the noise was enormous, you know. So one day they dropped the bombs and there was no explosion, no nothing. And then when the raid was over and no explosions, we walked back to the plant and then we walked right amongst the unexploded bombs. They were stuck in the soil and they had burst open and the yellow cordite was there were sticks of cordite in it, which was the explosive. And, we weren't allowed to touch it.
No, I saw that
Because we're, like our market.
Microsoft is also.
I think the Germans were afraid that we would take a bunch to the plant and
Yeah.
blow the plant.
Yeah.
Oh, and then here was
It is now.
Hardy Sattler
No.
was a Dutch guy, and he was a cook.
That's what I'm marketing.
So he worked in the kitchen,
Buyers, guess what?
you know, and at 12 o'clock, hi Harry, you know, he was the only Dutchman who worked in the kitchen. And then there was a bunch of women, German women, and the chief cook was a German man,
All the institutions.
and he was a bastard,
So the
he
people
was
who
a bastard.
analyze
Now Harry,
graphs,
the only reason I befriended Harry was because he was a cook. And I know that a cook always has access to surplus food. And that was my only motivation initially. So what we used to do on Sunday, that we always got pork chops. The rest of the week, forget about meat. You know? So what he would do, and he needed somebody to walk with me. We always went to go for long walks. He would steal a pork chop in addition to what he normally ate, which was more than we got. And during his walk, he would eat the pork chop.
And then I was at the time.
So I
Should I?
went out. I was glad to be able to go for a walk with him, you see, because then he would steal one from me too.
being chicken.
So I was, none of us was allowed to go outside the city limits of Leipzig.
Yeah.
So if they would catch us outside the limits, I don't know what they would do. Anyway, we would sometimes take a train to the next village. And there were lots of them all the way around the city, so every day there was a different one.
I got some water for you.
Adjustments on top, and they have to work another 320 days. Right? That's it, like, everybody experienced the same thing. But that's why I'll be darned if I have all my money betting it's going one direction. Right? So I'm hedging my bets, yeah. But I can do that several times.
Overall, they do.
So in any case,
Well, not.
we would walk to the little village eating pork chops. Sometimes we had more than one.
January.
So it was very nice, you know. But Harry had a problem, you see, there was this one girl and she was not very nice looking.
That's because whenever I.
And she knew it, and she liked Harry, but Harry didn't like her at all. And so one Sunday, and I saw it happen because there was a big counter, and you saw the kitchen was right behind it, and we were in the dining hall. And the girl got on his nerves, you know, he didn't like her. And so finally, they had tomato sauce to put over the food. So he had this nice round, I still see a spoon. And then she did something or say something that Harry didn't like. He said, shut up, you know, and he just flung the tomato sauce. And her whole face was full of tomato sauce. And the boss was just walking in and he said, you're fired! And Harry said, goody, goody, now I can go home. Harry said, so the boss said, no, you're not going home. You're going to get the hell out of the kitchen and we're going to find a job for you. So they found him a job, fire department. The problem with the fire department was they was in hall number 8, on the second floor, they had a whole sleeping quarters for the fire department. They weren't going to put the fire department downtown. The fire department for the plant was in the plant. And it was big property, you know. And he was going to get training and so on. So Harry said, I know bugger all about firefighting. I said, who cares? Yeah, but he said, I really want to know. Now here is the trick, you know. Harry knew that he had to look like a stupid Dutchman, you know. All Dutchmen were stupid according to the Germans, you know, because that's the way we behave. We behave ignorant or stupid, you know, so we reinforce their prejudice because the super race was of course German. So Harry said, tell me about firefighting. You know, as if I knew more about it than he did. I said, well, I'll tell you about firefighting. So here is a Dutchman talking in Nazi German. I said, the first thing you have to do is to make absolutely certain that you have a place to go back to after the raid. Why? I said, you want to sleep, don't you? Oh, okay. So the first place you have to save is your sleeping quarters. Well, that would be the last thing, according to the Germans, of course, because these goddamn foreigners, you know, they didn't give a damn whether they slept or not. So Harry said, fine. And then the next day he would say, hi, Harry. I said, what's new today, Harry? He said, I still haven't learned very much. He said, what else? You know, and I said, well, there are certain things you should never, ever do. And he said, and what's that? I said, well, anything that burns easily and has a sort of self-sustaining power. Yeah, he said, I wouldn't know what it is. And I said, well, we have big castings, and the castings were from me to you. And they were H-shaped cross-sections. And they were the two pieces, and I can show you photographs. They were holding up the engine against the firewall in the airplane. But they were made from magnesium, which is 2/3 the weight of aluminum, right? And they did beautiful work. I mean, they were anodized, they looked like gold, and they were laying outdoors, crisscross in piles, you know, because they couldn't rust or nothing. So they didn't have to store them indoors. I said, now there could be a fire. I said, the one thing you should never do is aim the fire hose on it when they're burning. Why not? I said, they will explode and they will spread all over the place and spread the fire and really make a mess of things. So you stay away, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, at the first raid,
Why not?
who had safeties headquarters, and who had
The guys who are coming close.
put their stupid hose on,
But here's the
and they were
thing.
trying to pull
Actually,
it away.
is saying, oh, yeah, he says it. He's saying.
And Harry's last name, what was his last name?
Sadler.
Sadler.
So let's.
I think S-A-T-T-L-E-N. It's a Germanic name, but
Because he's talking temporary, not permanent. But let's say Volkswagen. Do you know they have a
Harry
problem
was
with that?
quite a character, but he was being more strongly supervised afterwards.
So what are they doing
You were
now?
telling me that
They have a
when he
complete ban
was
on
pouring the
selling
water
diesel
on the
or
fire,
a four-cylinder diesel.
that finally a German had to pull the hose out of his hands and point it in the other direction.
Right?
Yeah,
And that was considered a victory because now the German was seen to be doing work.
What's going on?
yeah, well,
How do we get a handle on this?
I don't know if I
And you
put
come up
it in
with all
those
the
terms.
ideas, pros and cons, solutions, but that's what
But this German firefighter was a
stop everything. Let's find
professionally
a way.
trained.
Yeah.
Are they mad at us? We're
They had to
bombing
have
the
some.
hell out of their cities over there? Maybe we should stop.
And the
that.
fire
That should
department
be
was
number one
as
on the list.
important
Right?
as any
Because
soldier.
Here's the thing,
Yeah.
there's two
Oh,
things that
yeah.
have bothered me.
Because the center of the city, for example, they really,
Seem to be all well-fed young men.
most of the buildings
Right, in
were
clean
burned
clothes
out,
and
burned
money for
down, or, I mean, the highest
And
wall that
so
was
that
left
doesn't look like
standing
a
would be this
refugee.
high.
Okay, but also.
And I have a
ISIS,
book on Leipzig, and
all
there's
that
certain
brand new
places
Toyota trucks.
in the book where there's open space, you know, and this is many, many
Have
years
you ever
after
seen
the
a
war.
warrior
Yeah.
without a single bullet
Still
hole or
not,
scratch
nothing new was
or
being
on
built.
his truck? Oh, they have these parades.
So the Leipzig plant was where you were walking through and they had the engines that started with a crank on the stands.
Oh, that was a different story.
Yeah, I know, but was that the same plant?
Yeah.
Yeah. And was it also the same plant where you saw the gas tank for the ME, was it 262 or 162?
No, where I saw rocket planes.
Yeah, was that the same plant?
But
No,
There's two types
that
of
was the
muscle,
one in
right?
Dessau, because I ended up in Dessau around Christmas.
Oh, so after they
See,
started.
we had our air raid in early December,
Yeah.
The Sunnis are Saudi
and then
Arabian, right?
we were sent immediately to
And
Dessau.
Shia is Iran. We're talking the biggest countries that
So
have.
what happened there was I worked for a guy,
See, I get so, when I.
a Bavarian, who
I
did
cannot
design, had a design department.
Yeah.
Which are the ones that.
But the Germans didn't realize that I was a foreigner.
ISIS is Sunni.
Somehow or another in the organizing of
Right.
it. So I went to
But they're
Dessau
a
with him.
rebel group, but they're
He
like
wanted
a
me, he
religious
liked me,
Sunni
you know, and
Muslim.
he wasn't a
It's
Nazi.
two types, it doesn't matter really, but it's like Orthodox.
So we got to- and he-
Catholic, okay?
I mean, he behaved like he normally
Who's
behaved,
giving
he
the
always
money?
worked for
Well,
Yonkers.
the Sunni brothers, 'cause these Saudi
So
Arabia has been
he
spreading
ends up
a very
in Dessau
radical version
and
of
wanted to
Islam
take me
around the
into
world.
the
Mosques
Automaterwerke,
paid
they
for
call
by the
it. There was the
Saudis.
Automater,
But
named after a famous
With it
designer
comes
they
their
had before
radical
they built
brand
planes.
Islam. And they're the Wahhabi Muslim, which is what Saudi
And
Arabia
Vatican means plant.
There's this guy.
And that was the experimental department of
There's no interpretation of the Quran.
Yonkers.
What is written is what is.
So I got stopped at the gate. They just wouldn't let
You
me.
can't stop and you
Special,
can't not stop.
special
It's
gate
exactly.
pass. Only people that have sworn secret, all that kind of crap.
So
I was allowed in.
Got a huge
So
amounts
then they
of
found
money
work
from
for me
Saudi
across the road,
Arabia,
close to
going-
the main
going for those
entrance,
terrorists.
where I could
Yeah.
do work for him for the other
real
place. So
smartest thing for the United States to do is get out of there.
what happened
And
was
let-
that
And let Iran
I
and
just
Saudi Arabia fight it out.
walked in,
What the hell?
And
They don't
the
have.
somebody sent me, my boss actually sent me an envelope with a big drawing,
The people suffer.
which was a
didn't they?
complete drawing
But
of
if
the
you're not
engine.
shooting all day, if you let
So I
somebody take
just
over your territory, and you keep your
Took
head
some
down, you
thumbtacks and
survive,
put on the wall.
right?
But there were
Or
12
if you
people
really
working
don't
in
like
the
it,
department,
you
and
just
they were
become a refugee
creepy.
and
Many
leave
of
the
them were
country and
creepy
work Germany.
kids, but they were all draftsmen.
If you don't think they're gonna fix it, right?
So
'Cause here's the thing.
I knew what I had to do. I had to lay out the pipes
I don't like a
for cooling
side
system all the way
that's
around.
sort of a-
We had no computer system that would
Yeah.
take interference,
and I
but
don't like
we had to have
ISIS,
10 millimeter space
and I
between
don't
all
like
parts
Saudi
that could
Arabia
shake.
running it, or Hezbollah, or
And
whatever.
that
So
whole
what do they do?
project
They
took me about 3 months or 4 months,
So
and I
that's-
still wasn't
but
finished
If
after
you're a
that.
Muslim and you like a sort of
Because
more
they thought I
modern
was very
Arabic,
good at
then why not
3D.
just hang around in Turkey?
But I've never worked slower in my life, you know, and so on.
but
But
what
I
I'm saying,
didn't
it's a
care
little
because there was
nuts.
nobody
Why
else
should
who
the United States be
would
policing?
dare do it.
Yeah, that is what that's.
But
I
then
never-
the funny part of the engine
Why should
was,
Canada be
the
policing?
engine drawing
That's
was
why
that
I'm happy as
it
hell
said a big letter,
planning
secret,
to get a
observe,
plane out of
secrecy.
there. What, you know, it's a great to have target
Well, how could a
practice.
bloody foreigner
We
have a
don't
secret
need to
drawing
shoot.
that they had never seen in their lives? That these guys had never seen a secret drawing.
But
There was
basically
just a
also,
Euro 213 engine, which was the latest
uh,
12-cylinder engine.
if the United States
There was
applied
just a
pressure
view
so that Saudi Arabia stopped
of the
funding
outside
them,
of it only, you know,
right?
of several
They can't do
views.
it. They can't affect what other countries do. So they're gonna make a
So
whole
then there
mess
was
of that
this
whole
little
area.
creepy
Well,
guy
the
in the
other thing is,
corner, and he
you know,
was
these
talking to him,
refugees, how come they're not going to
pointing
Saudi
at
Arabia?
me, you know. And then the second day I was there, this big guy in the black uniform comes in, SS,
Well, what I'm saying is, like,
which
if
is
you
the
get
worst type of
refugees,
military that you can have.
they have, like,
And
that's where we're actually picking up a lot of our refugees, is from
they
Jordan.
pointed at
They've been
me, the
sitting in
boss,
these
and,
camps for years.
and I got arrested.
So it's easy to pick up 25,000
And they took that
people.
drawing
There's-
off the
You
wall.
can take that off one street. Right?
And then
But
I
that's why the
went
Canadian
down
government is
underneath the
smart.
main
Don't
entrance,
take them
which was
on the hook.
the separation was only a concrete floor.
They're all sitting there, they're
Yeah, I was
following
put
the
in a
rules, they're
cell.
UN registered.
This was sort of a prison.
You don't think?
So I got in there at around
Saying these went to Germany, they wouldn't get registered.
10:30 in the morning.
Wouldn't get registered by the UN. Why take those?
But before I got there was this other little guy, another little guy, but friendly type.
You hear what happened
He said, in German, he said, they know what they're gonna do with you. right?" I said, no. He said, they're gonna take you downstairs. And he said, they're gonna
people that were just
shoot you
arrived.
because of sabotage, because you were working with the secret
Or
drug.
get together. And they were
And
standing outside waiting for the
I
bus.
said, well, I said, my boss is so-and-so, and he's in the automata relic, and he gave me
Oh,
the drawing and gave me orders to do it. I said, I'm supposed to be working for you guys.
yeah, I know, but still.
And then the guy said, doesn't matter. And then I had the rosary in my pocket. The Catholics used to have that a lot. So when he saw that,
It makes me very.
he said, you better keep that, because you may need to do a lot of praying.
Yeah. But anyways.
I got no food,
But
I got
all
no
I'm
water,
saying is, there's
I got
things
no
that
warrant.
happen that are just stupid.
no
And
blankets,
what I'm
and there was
saying,
just
I
a,
don't know what Trump's policy is.
you know, it was like a wooden platform, you know, with the slats spaced maybe 3 inches.
Yeah.
Who said that?
I could lie down if I wanted to. Sitting was very uncomfortable. It was 4 o'clock
But, you know,
before
when you're doing
some
massive
guy
bad,
came down
The whole thing is, you always have
and
hope
asked
for
me
a
to
lot.
follow him upstairs. And I got all my stuff back. And I said, what's going on? They said, your boss has liberated you.
Opinion on Trudeau.
They only told him much later what they'd done to me.
But you
They
know
were
what?
going to arrest him. you know.
Like,
I found out later.
called the President of the United
Turns
States.
out that he was not the type that wants to be arrested.
He says,
He was well known in this experimental department, and boy, did they ever raise the rockets. And apparently, some guys
he's very smart.
got hell in the place where I was.
But if he grew up in the public eye,
But anyway,
inherent.
they kept me there till the end of the week, and then I was sent back to Leipzig. In the meantime,
I didn't vote for him, but, you know,
we had a nice room in a local hotel downstairs. And Dessau was such that if there was an air raid, they had these big drums and a little pipe, and a nozzle at the end, and it would spray some chemical, and that would make a fog bank out of the town so that they couldn't see whether they were bombing Leipzig or not. That was one thing. The funniest part was something that everybody else didn't find so funny. In the middle of the night, the first night I was there, the phone rang. Well, I wasn't used to a phone. I wasn't used to a phone in a hotel. But finally I picked it up and I said, hello? And the guy at the other end said, alarm, bitte. And what he basically said, translated, is, alarm, please. In other words, the sirens are going, you better go to the basement. But he presented it as if it was one of the great privileges of staying in the hotel. Alarm, bitte.
Yeah, it would be-
Bitte is the word for please.
So, I guess I got a couple of questions. One is the Leipzig plant where they did the engines, and you had that experience with the crank start engine. Who was that with? You were going around and you were talking like you normally did, where you tell them what not to do, because now you're speaking like a true stupid Dutchman would. That you would say, please don't do this, because of course that would be bad.
Yeah.
But then he went and did it. So, who was that guy? You don't remember? Remember that story?
Yeah, I remember the
Yeah.
story. Because what it was, the crank, the starter was like any starter about this big, only about this long.
Yeah.
And the reason the Germans had it in the U-88s, you know, the twin-engine bomber, was because if it had to make an emergency landing in enemy territory, how do you start the engine? You know, they had ground handling equipment on their own airports, but you're in the middle of a big field. The planes were designed to be able to take off if you had a damn good pilot and if there was no heavy load in it. But it was very hard to get the engine started. There was no way, you know. So they had a mechanical starter, in other words. And what it basically did, when you shoved the crank in there, in the hole, it would lift the brushes of the electric motor, or whatever it was. And this thing would start a flywheel. And you had to watch it because you had to know that it had to go at least 12,000 revolutions per minute. And at that speed you could pull out the crank, and then the brushes would come to the commutator, and the engine would do that's it, you know, it just would make 1.5, 2 revolutions. It better be starting, you know? Otherwise you had to do it again.
Yeah.
So it was hard work to get it going, but it could be done, and they were trained to do it, you know, they knew how to do it. But it was also possible, for safety's sake, they had a clamp on the shaft, which is basically wrong thinking, probably. And if you had a clamp on, of course, then it wouldn't be too good for the equipment. So, and it wouldn't go fast enough to start the engine. It would just try to start.
So it was in an engine stand then, that had the
Yeah,
clamp?
they have
Yeah.
support like an L-shaped thing, and the engine was, this was
Yeah.
like the firewall, and here was the engine. The system they used for all engines in Germany was very good. They had like 2 arms, 4 points to fasten it, or sometimes only 2. But there was like a ball joint at the firewall. And if you loosen these 2 ball joints, you would take the engine and turn it 90 degrees to work at the back of the engine. Because there was no room between the engine and the firewall if you kept it in the place where it belonged on the phone. But it was, in my mind, a marvelous system. I don't think that too many of them copied that type of system. In the engines, there were only 2, the Jumo, Junkers, and the other engine was BMW. BMW had a 12-cylinder engine.
So did the BMW have a hand start as well, or just the Umo?
I have no idea. It was
Yeah.
an extra item. You know, they
Yeah.
didn't use it everywhere because if
Yeah.
you know, they flew in different directions. They probably could use different planes.
So you're saying just the U-88 might have been the only one to have this feature?
No, the ones that had the Jumo engine.
Yeah,
No, the ones that were flying over Russia.
yeah,
That's the
Okay.
ones that they were concerned about.
okay. And so what I remember of that story was that you told him not to do it, but he ended up doing it during your conversation because he was asking how to start it, and he put it in, cranked it up, then pulled it out, the engine went vroom, and the
Oh,
the
wait a
shaft.
minute. No, there was another thing. Yeah, there was another thing. The shaft. They weren't supposed to start it, but the shaft up front, where the propeller goes, it was clamped.
It was clamped, and that clamp,
And had grooves,
right,
so it just wouldn't budge unless you wanted to ruin it.
right. So when he pulled it out after winding it up, it turned over, and that stripped the splines on the
Yes, and then the
propeller off.
crankshaft was an 80 kilogram item. It was the biggest item in the engine.
Yeah,
That'd take the whole engine apart. Oh, talking about taking the engines apart. So this was hall number 8, where all the old geezers were working, and the floors were black with oil and everything. It was a bad place to work. There was a lot of Dutch guys working. And so the people that worked, the Germans that worked there, they got extra rations simply to pacify them. So here was this Dutchman, and he said, "I don't like to work there." I said, "I can understand." You know? He said, "But I don't get enough rations." I said, "Oh, well," he said, it's hard work." I said, "All right." So then they said, "What can we do to make things easier?" What he really was saying is, "Can you show me a method by which I can get the hell out of here and work somewhere else?" And so I came back to him and I said, "Well, there is one way of doing it." I said, "You have a whole lot of people working there, but when you lift, they did it by hand, when you lift out the crankshaft," I said, "that's the heaviest part." I said, "Don't drop it." It's because the precision is also very important, and they don't want to take chances. So after that, they got a lot of these Dutch guys dropping crankshafts, which was 2 guys, you know, just lifting them. And they behaved as if they were too weak to hang on to them. were the Germans ever mad, you know, in two ways. First of all, the boss got mad as a horn, said, "You bastards." They said, "We can't help it. We need more food, maybe." And they got food, but they still dropped them and so on. They were just stupid Dutchmen. And then they said, "Well, we get more reliable workers here." So they got a whole bunch of old Germans added to the crew. Already there, the Dutchmen were put somewhere.
Can you see it?
The things they have to invent, you know.
Nice, stop skating.
And they have a skating rink in front of City Hall and shit.
Yeah.
You know
So-
that? You know that?
Yeah.
Don't know what else.
Now tell me about the gas tank for the that jet that you came upon.
Oh,
that
oh
somewhere.
no. Oh,
Which plant was that at?
the rocket,
Yeah.
the rocket plane
Okay.
engine.
Was it an engine that you saw?
Yeah, but it wasn't a regular engine. It was like
Turbine?
no, a rocket.
Yeah.
Has nozzles, and it just spouts off a lot of
Yeah.
material in the hell of a hurry. But the main thing, no, wait a minute, no, there was another one. There was the Messerschmitt 262.
262, yeah.
That particular one. Oh no, I know that one. The rocket plane I only saw from a distance. The Messerschmitt 262 at the time was basically on the secret list. And the 262, very rarely would you see one.
Yeah.
But they had a few. But what the main thing with it was, and that's why it was at Junkers,
Yeah.
they used the Junkers jet engine. They were the first jet engines, the second type of jet engines that the Germans were using for the fighter plane, and they had a twin engine job.
Yeah.
So I'd never seen a jet engine before in my life. Even just to see the outside of it was kind of amazing. You know, they don't forget, nobody knew about that stuff. In England, they didn't know about their jet engines and so on, except the people that were directly involved. I mean, that was all on the secret list. And the Americans didn't have any. The only ones with jet engines were the Germans and the Brits. And I think the first jet to fly was a Heinkel, which had a little jet engine. But the UMO 004 was the German jet engine. And now here's the problem. I think there were about 100 turbine blades on the rotor. And turbine, of course, the part that gets hottest. The Germans didn't have free access to chromium and all those super materials to build their blades, you know. It's hard enough to make turbine blades. They make turbine blades hollow. Now just think of the manufacturing problem of building. Today you wouldn't have a problem really. You know, you could do the 3D build-up. But in those days they had to use pressing and forging and drilling and you name it, just to build one blade, and it had to have serrations to where it would fit in the rotor disc. And it had to be able to stand the temperature, because if it got, and also, if it got too hot, it would expand so much that the end of the blade would hit the housing.
Yeah.
So there got to be a gap, and they had to be precise. So these engines had an average between service lifetime of about 3 hours. Then they had to replace the rotor. But just to build it, you know, I mean, I don't know where they made the rotors. But no doubt they had some place there.
Yeah.
But it was interesting work, but quite a bit. Now, the reason I saw them was because it was dinner time or something, or lunchtime, and I started walking. And I walked in and out of places that I wasn't supposed to. And then while I was walking another day, also in Dessau, I saw this guy I know. And it was for a neighbor in Holland. So we had a nice conversation. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Same as you, not much." But we were looking at the trees. The trees were so interesting. They were much like what you see on that painting,
Yeah.
except just at the top. And I said, the camouflage they have here, and they had camouflage nets over the buildings and so on. I said, it's unbelievable how much time they've spent to camouflage so that from the air you couldn't tell this was an aircraft plane. And I said, and these trees, where did they get the gold darn idea of having just this spindly, trunk, and then just a few needles at the top of it. It was obviously a fir tree or something like it. He said, those are the only real trees on the whole property. Everything else was fake.
So, was it in Dessau then that
Dessau.
Dessau, that you saw the?
The rocket plane I saw in Leipzig.
Okay, so did you see the gas tank for the rocket plane in Leipzig? Because you said you were wandering in and out of areas you weren't supposed to at one of the plants, and then you saw the Comet's gas tank, because you saw that at the Aeronautical Museum in Ottawa, the gas tank, and you said, I came across one of those at a plant that I was in, and they were kind of upset because it was a secret development. Maybe
No,
don't have that.
I don't remember a gas tank.
Okay, and what was another one? You were at a drafting board, went for a walk, came back, and the guys were.
Oh,
looking at your phone?
that was in Curtin. So this other guy I was with in the train,
Yeah.
and he went to the airframe plant at the Curtin. You're right. They were also testing engines, which of course they didn't announce before.
Yeah. So how did you
This
get
was
to Curtin?
I was sent there because after the second raid on Leipzig, the department where I worked was bombed out. So that was the second time I got bombed out. So they sent me to Curtin with my boss and so on. And drafting board, in a small department. I mean, it was no bigger than these two rooms.
Yeah.
And I heard this, sound, and it was a turbine. It wasn't a regular engine. And it was engine testing. I saw guys in white coats and everything else. And I kept on asking them, they never told me. They're just engine testing, that's all they told me. And then what happened at one time, because I roamed around, as was my habit, I heard this enormous bang. It was an explosion. Well, what had happened, one of these turbines had blown apart. And one of the scoops, one of the blades, went right through, at this level, went right through the department where I was, right across, and went through a wall and then dropped in the corridor next to the wall. That was the place where I was supposed to be standing behind the drafting board. So that was kind of a relief that I hadn't been killed. I didn't know what it was in the beginning.
Yeah.
3 guys got killed on the test stand
Yeah.
at the same time. So.
It's funny because I've been in a test cell for turbines at NRC, and they were talking about their challenges because they were gonna build a new one. And
A new what?
a new test stand for jet turbine engines,
Yeah, okay.
because the new jet engines are they're geared turbofans.
Oh, yeah, they're
So,
large, very
so they're
large.
very large for the horsepower. So their test cell could handle the horsepower, but it couldn't handle the size of the engine anymore, nor could it handle the airflow. So they have to build a new one. And one of the guys I talked to at NRC was actually on the international committee for test cell specifications, and he was telling
Yeah,
me.
because you want to standardize.
Yeah, he was telling me that the test cell wall thicknesses in concrete had to be at least a foot, or maybe it was 2 feet, but it had to be all the way around, of course, so,
Yeah, and they have to have rebar,
yeah,
reinforcement.
yeah, so it's kinda cool.
But it's not easy to determine what the design parameters have to be,
Yeah,
but it's fairly easy to design the concrete
Yeah.
structure.
yeah,
That's one thing that concrete is very good at. I hate concrete myself.
Yeah.
I think it's terrible material. I mean, a million cracks. Pretty old. I mean, you have to use a microscope to find them. I'm a lightweight. Well, you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Automotive airplanes.
yeah,
And people have learned to deal with lightweight and still survive. But the same thing, my approach to ocean safety. I mean, my first remark, because I said I know bugger all about it, they still wanted me, just as a gadfly, I guess. Well, one of the first remarks I made when somebody asked me the question, I said, why are boats designed to capsize? I mean, here we have been living as mankind with ages and ages and ages of experience on the separation between the sky and the ocean. Two totally different media. And the people in the Pacific, they know how to build non-capsizing vessels. And the only thing that we have been able to think of so far is like on some of the Navy ships, is tanks, where you pump water from one side of the ship to the other, depending on which way it's leaning. But how can you react fast enough to prevent capsizing? But basically, a boat is built like a bucket. It's open at the top. I don't care how small the opening is, but it's open at the top. The stable ones are like the submarines.
they're not so good to ride on the surface though.
Well, but you have to make up your mind what you're going to do. You can have a submarine flotation, and the rest all above the water.
Yeah.
I saw a picture in the paper yesterday or the day before of the new container ship. It's building 5 of them. One is finished, and it barely fits under the bridges. It's 133 meters wide. Container ship, made in China. But it's the ASL or the ACL line, Atlantic Container Line, which in turn is owned by an Italian company. It can take more containers than any ship is taking, but they also have a whole open areas where you can have very large objects and so on. That thing will never capsize. I mean, it's just going by the looks and the shape of it. I don't think that so. I don't think it will ever capsize. Because it is more in the scale of the wave, the maximum waves that you might encounter. But all the rest of the time we have built ships that are just too damn small. But to think in terms of large, and not having reached the optimum shape means we're very hesitant to build very large things. It's but again, you know, why would somebody ask the question? Some people do, some people don't. I think that's the first step in engineering is the analysis. So, drilling platforms, you know, the ones that had disasters, they were designed by people that designed platforms, but not for the ocean.
Yeah.
It would work very well on land. Here we have the ocean ranger and the capsized. And it was a simple flaw, you know. It was just in one of the legs, one of the hollow legs, there was a hole and they couldn't plug it. And the amount of money they spent, apparently it's not a money matter because Shell Oil will build one of the largest floating platforms in the world that hasn't capsized yet. They're thinking in terms of billions of dollars just to build one.
Yeah.
You know, $2.5 billion or something.
Yeah.
I'm always, in a way, you know, with Anita is now finished. But here she spends a whole lifetime and everything went hunky-dory. And then I heard sort of what I put together some chance remarks indirectly that originally she was going to be involved a couple of years ago with drilling platforms in the Bering Strait, you know, which is north of Alaska or west of Alaska.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest part to have drilling platforms. There's no worse part in the world. And the President of the United States had said that if you can't do it in 2 years, don't do it, because you're not going to get permit. So I don't know where he got his information, but somebody must have enlightened him. And they have decided not to do it. And that was part and parcel for her next job.
Well, that was going to be her next job?
She was going to be part of that big crew.
Oh, so she's not doing that then?
No.
Because she had mentioned when I
She's
saw her last.
officially retired.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, she still has to work till the end of her term.
Yeah. But she had said after this Quest project that she had one more project that she was being asked to do, but it sounds like from what you're saying that it's been canceled.
That's my conclusion. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
But I think I put two and two together more often.
Yeah. Makes sense. And I think we're done reminiscing
Okay.
for the most part.
It's only 1 hour and 18 minutes.